Ladies and gentlemen, our next session, automating intelligence to drive speed, precision, and scale.
Hey everybody, I'm Dooley Tombras. I'm going to be moderating here, and I'm going to introduce my panelists. First up, Alex Potts.
Yeah, I'm Alexander Potts. I also work at Tombras. I oversee programmatic, digital investment, and ad technologies.
My name is Calvin Fields. I work for Pods Moving and Storage. We're a direct-to-consumer e-commerce business in the moving and storage space. We've been around for about 25 years, and I'm in charge of brand and media.
And let's talk about the first thing here, customer journey. It's a hot topic. It's changed a lot. Calvin, tell us at Pods, how are you approaching thinking about the journey right now?
I mean, I think the most important thing for us and what we spend a lot of our time thinking about is how does the customer go through the purchasing cycle for our product? They move so infrequently, once every 7 years. And our media strategy is informed by how they approach not only our product, but also the broader category. And oftentimes what we find is it's a non-linear journey. And most importantly is like determining where the customer is in that journey so that we can speak to them in a way that moves them to the next step. Our industry is really commoditized for the reason that you don't move very often. You're not familiar with what you're to experience. You don't really know what something costs. And so we think it's our job that we really have to find you at your stage in the journey and move you to that next step, particularly if you are more likely to be price sensitive and choose a lower priced option.
I think that, for a brand that isn't like Pods with a much shorter purchase cycle, what we always forget is, like we always like to talk about, we need to push people from awareness to consideration to conversion to retention. But for most customers, that brand experience is not linear, right? We see people all the time jumping from consideration to purchase to forgetting they purchased in the first place to then repurchasing. So I think that what we've kind of done as an industry is take a very simplified and templated approach to something that is a lot more complex, right? And the need for data to be able to understand, to your point, not just where they are in that purchase cycle, but not every consumer is the same. And we always like to talk about 3, 4, 5 RTBs per brand, but at the end of the day, what each customer needs to convert is going to be completely different, right? And the ability to harness data to be able to draw that intelligence out to understand the customer base and understand what each individual truly needs is kind of fundamental to how a lot of companies need to be addressing the customer journey.
We think a lot about in the terms of probabilities or margin of error, right? Certainly we have all of the data, and thanks to a partnership with you guys to think about the customer through the journey. But we're not really certain if they're likely to convert or not likely to convert that very day based on where they are in the steps of the process. And so we think about it in terms of like their probability at a certain point in the journey to convert, and if you will, placing bets on reaching that customer an additional time or through an additional medium to move them along that step of the journey, because we can't exactly be certain, but we do know that if you have gotten a quote from us in the past 7 days, you're more likely to convert, within this time period. And so that's how we break that down.
I think you made a really good call out there about like improvement, right? Like I think that CMOs now more than ever are held so accountable to business outcomes, which is awesome. Right, we used to see that every time a new CEO came into a business, they'd bring their own team. But now the boards of these companies are really starting to understand the true impact that marketing is having on a business's bottom line. And with that said, we've seen a lot of the time that these CMOs are empowered sometimes just as much as the CEO to the success of the company. And that has a lot of sticking power for a lot of CMOs. But at the same time, there's a lot of pressure to drive those outcomes, right, and to be perfect. And I think that we forget a lot of the time, it isn't about being perfect. It isn't about getting it right every time. It's about getting it right more times than we did prior as well.
Okay, the next topic, the biggest topic at Zeta Live, other than Seth Rogen, of course. I mean, let's talk about identity. And what are y'all seeing right now that's kind of in the cutting edge of identity and intelligence in 2023?
Yeah, I'm going to jump into this one because, identity is definitely my favorite topic. I think that everyone talks about the negatives of identity, right? And not necessarily, and the negatives of identity deprecation, but not necessarily the positives. Like, I think that the ability to no longer truly attribute conversions at a one-to-one has kind of made people rethink if attribution was ever the right way, was ever right to begin with, right? Like we always talk about, like, if you actually look at how a cookie works, it was probably the worst way we could have developed it, right? And that just stayed in the industry. And I feel like last touch attribution has kind of been any performance marketer's main way of understanding media performance. And at the end of the day, that's not actually, we see much lower correlation for last touch conversions to actual business outcomes than anyone would expect. And I think that kind of identity and the deprecation of identity has led to a huge expansion in modeling, in measurement, in forecasting that's kind of going to pave the way for truly understanding what audiences we want to reach and what audiences are actually driving our business forward, not necessarily what is Google Analytics or what is Omniture saying is driving our business forward.
I think this concept is absolutely connected to what Alex said regarding what marketers are held accountable to, which is sales. And at the end of the day, what we spend a ton of time thinking about is not attribution, which is we served a customer an ad and we saw that they converted. That's just simply we were able to reach someone in their purchase path. We think about influence, which is we're able to reach a customer and influence them to conversion. So as you think about like the deprecation, it really allows us to step back from the table and not rest our laurels on, hey, we saw this customer converted through some last touch model or a multi-touch model, and we actually believe that the money that we spent drove an outcome for our business. We're a direct-to-consumer business. We've been around for a long time, and like the money that we spend is the money that drives our business. And so if we are spending money to reach people who would have converted anyways, we're less concerned about that. The challenge is it goes back to the point I made around probability and bets. We can see that people convert when we spend more money on branded search. We're not necessarily certain all of the time. It's 100% incremental. And so we place bets from a tactic perspective as we reach the customer to influence them in their journey.
And I think that's going to be one of the most interesting kind of facets of the next 2-3 years is turning those unknown questions into known answers. And I think that's where the industry is definitely heading, to your point.
Well, you mentioned the unknown. You know, marketing can be pretty scary in 2023, and one of the scariest things is what you don't know. Well, what are the unknown factors, Calvin, that are keeping you up at night right now in your marketing?
I mean, I think first and foremost is the money that we spend to acquire customers, like what is actually working. My friends at Tombras know this perhaps all too well from how we operate our business, but the only way to truly understand that is to turn something off. It's only 100% incremental.
And that's scary.
It's scary for a lot of reasons, not the least of which are business results. But I think firstly and foremost is it working? Because from a business perspective, I'm incented just like all of my colleagues that I work with and performance. I don't want to spend money because it feels good. I want to spend money because it's going to drive the outcome that we're looking for. Number two is, for our category specifically, we don't know a lot about the customer journey from a moving perspective. Where are you in the journey, and how can we influence you from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4? And that really keeps us up at night, because otherwise, we're leaning on certainly attribution models. We do a lot of work in the regression space to tell us what influences the customer along the journey. But I think if we knew a lot more about who the customer was, not necessarily what they consumed, but what advertising do they consume that influences their decision making, those are the type of things that we feel like would really make step change in our business.
And I think people forget all the time, like everyone likes to focus on the impact media is having, right? But very few and far between outside of an e-commerce company is media or advertising actually impacting more than 50% of the business, right? At the end of the day, the number one killer of a business is not the CPA or media inefficiency going up to 15%. What's the real killer of a business is market volatility, right? Like, no matter how big you are, a shift in the market, and we saw this in COVID, right? Companies that have been around for 80, 50 years suddenly didn't exist anymore, because at the end of the day, it's not major shifts in marketing that cause that. It's major shifts in the market, right? And I think that, for example, I'm from South Florida. Don't know if anyone else is. And I was just visiting my family, and off lease only. They are a $250 million a year revenue car company that sells used lease cars, right? They have blown up over the last 15 years in South Florida, as you could assume. If anyone's been to South Florida, people are, I will say, flashy, to say the least. So there's a lot of lease cars that end up being sold afterwards. And at the end of the day, what they did is in COVID, when there was a huge spike in the car market, and they were able to sell cars for 10, 15%, 25% above MSRP, and they went out and they bought as many cars as they could. And then as soon as that market shifted, they had all these cars that they just bought at a super high interest rate, and they couldn't even sell them for what they bought them for, right? And they went bankrupt. And that goes to show, like, it's not just about the marketing, it's connecting the marketing and the understanding or intelligence of your market and the ever-changing market specifically that actually drives success for a business, right? And if you don't have a day-to-day understanding of both those things, it makes it really, really hard to not just be successful, but even survive in the first place.
Okay, this might be my favorite question, and I hope the fine folks at Zeta are listening. If you guys could wave a magic wand, what data set would you create that you don't have right now that you could go turn loose and activate in 2024?
I mean, I think it's really, this is very specific to our category, right? But it's the ability to understand when you're in the market. I think, again, we think about things in terms of probabilities. We want to find opportunities to reach customers with our message when they're not necessarily in market. We are a very unique category because of the infrequency of use. But we really want to deploy a lot of money when we know that you're starting to make some decisions. The difficulty for a category like ours is there's a lot of inputs that might determine you to be in the market. You are looking at houses. You have been to Zillow.com. You have gotten a mortgage application in the most recent months. But for us, we feel like we know the strategy to reach a lot of people with our message. It's video-based advertising when the customer is engaged. We lean a lot into sports. We lean a lot into television advertising. Our consumer is more likely to be a little bit older and younger than just the general consumer. But at the end of the day, when you go from there to follow the consumer through the journey, what we would really love to know is, when do we overspend on you? Because we know what we've reached you, I'm making it up, in a NASCAR race or an NFL game. But then once you're in market, we're going to follow you through the cycle, whether it be typically in video, follow you through the purchase cycle, because oftentimes what we find is prohibited is making those probabilistic bets in things that are like really expensive, if that makes sense, to reach people.
Yeah, and I'm really proud of the industry for like pushing itself forward from that perspective, right? Like, is measurement and modeling perfect? Absolutely not, right? As we all know, it's very probabilistic, but at the end of the day, it's improving every single day. I think that another thing that we always forget about is, how do we combine that with all the exogenous factors for true forecasting? And I'm not just talking about market factors, right? I think like the perfect data set any brand would want to have is their competitors' data, right? And an understanding of how their competitors are performing against them on a daily, weekly basis, on a market-by-market basis. Because at the end of the day, forecasts are great, but they're so macro. And understanding, we hear it all the time, right? Hey, these 15, 20, 30 locations, especially retail, are not performing well, right? And the ability to understand, well, how are you defining performance, right, based on a retail-based forecast? How are your competitors performing? And being able to tie that all together. And I know that's never going to happen, unfortunately, unless everyone wants to share their data, which I don't think is going to happen. But
I think at the end of the day, we're marketers, and at the basis, we are trying to influence the purchase decision, right? And so whether or not we want to get into the conversation of like, does it work or not, we really believe that like, if we don't see it in sales, why? Now, you can go down the path of, well, perhaps this would have happened anyways. We're in the midst of perhaps the worst housing market that the country's seen in 20 years. Our job is to understand that, forecast the future, and then determine a way forward to grow. We as a team, we're a lever to the business to drive growth. And so I think ultimately, what I talk to the team about a lot is, we can look at all of the quote unquote media metrics, right? Click-through rates, and hey, we're spending more, we're seeing higher click-through rates, sessions on the site. But at the end of the day, it's not defending whether or not we spent this money and it worked, but like truly hold ourselves accountable to the sales that we're driving, because we are meant to influence the outcome of the business.
Okay, from one end of the spectrum to the other, that was the dream data sets that you wished you all had. What are your biggest pain points right now from a data fragmentation standpoint?
I can go first. I think the biggest pain point at a lot of brands out there is actually not. It has nothing to do with the data itself. It probably has to do with the foundational structure of a company, specifically the CIO. And I know that at a lot of companies, there's definitely been a huge shift in how a CIO or a head of data security kind of operates, right? And their main job is to make the company as safe as possible, right? And make sure that everyone is moving in the same direction. But at the same time, there is definitely been a lack of knowledge out there about how to harness and leverage your zero-party, first-party data. I mean, we're making up new terms like zero-party data all the time, so it makes it confusing. But at the end of the day, like there's been a kind of an interesting dynamic at a lot of brands where there's almost a butting of heads, if you will, between the marketers and the data security information teams, because one is trying to harness that data to push the company forward, and the other is trying to protect the company from that data, right? And I think that at the end of the day, what you really need is a leader of that company, whether it's a CEO, a founder, a president, an operator, right, that has a true vision of where they're trying to get to kind of bridge the gap between the marketing department and the data security teams, to be able to bring everything together. Because I think that a lot of companies don't even get to the point of understanding or trying to even solve for how do they commingle all their data sets, because they're not even allowed to get there in the first place.
We talk a lot about what happens to the customer once they enter our ecosystem. Being able to then go upstream from there, we all know this is really difficult. Because of the cookie deprecation and things like that from a privacy perspective, these things are a little bit of the past. Hey, we saw that customer A converted and we reached them across these different touch points in the journey. And if we optimize to that journey, we're really picking media tactics based on our ability to measure them, which we kind of are at odds with. But what we love partnering with Zeta on is intelligence. At the end of the day, the most important thing for us is who's out there, who's in the market, what do they look like, and how can we design a way to reach and influence that customer. Back to the point of probabilities, we know for certain we're not going to be able to track deterministically from a television impression to a conversion all the way through the funnel. So trying to do that seems to be a little bit difficult versus who is out there, who are they, how do they operate, what do they do from a consumption perspective, how do we design a marketing strategy to reach those people. And then at the end of the day, we want to understand that customer once they get in our ecosystem. What are they doing after they've kind of engaged with us, hit our website, gotten a quote, talked to one of our sales agents, and then design a personalized experience to bring them back to convert.
I think that if anyone watched, I think the second talk upstairs, apologies if I butcher this, but Giannine brought up a really important fact that I think doesn't get discussed enough, which is like how far we've come from an audience targeting perspective. You kind of just talked about it. Is we used to talk about these personas or these audiences, and we've kind of escalated that to understanding hundreds of signals about every single consumer, whether it's contextual, taking into account real world factors, on and on and on. And we've seen that the walled gardens have kind of capitalized on those things, right? Everyone will admit there's no better algorithm than Google's or Meta's because of all the signals they get to intake. But I think that we've kind of gone too far down the road of it's not just being able to make your media more efficient. It's also about garnering intelligence to improve your media, right? There's no feedback loop with a lot of the walled gardens, and I think that's definitely frustrated a lot of marketers when it comes to consumer intelligence, creative intelligence, right? And being able to tie that all together, and I think that that's one of the things that's going to be really, really important over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, is how do we continue to make AI, algorithms, models, more and more and more sophisticated while being able to pull more and more and more out of them, because a lot of these things have not just implications on the marketing, they get implications on the product side, on the retail side, on, and I think being able to use the marketing departments at every single brand as kind of a conduit to be able to combine your external data sets with your internal data sets and kind of bring that all together to kind of be the powerhouse of all those other departments and all those other teams, because at the end of the day, the customer data, whether it's your first-party data or the customers you're going after, as well as just all the data that you're able to intake, actually can fuel a lot of intelligence that has nothing to do with marketing in the first place.
Okay, Alex, you talked about commingling data. What are some business challenges that you all think could be solved by better commingling of data leading to new intelligence?
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that we've seen across commingling data is measurement, right? And we kind of talked about it earlier, but being able to kind of bring measurement to the forefront of everything we do, while at the same time having it be predictable and repeatable. I think that we talk about testing as an industry a lot. And being able to showcase the impact of that testing using commingled data sets, whether it's your in-store CRM, your online CRM or first-party data, and being able to tie everything together. But I think that at the end of the day, there's so many additional factors that we don't take into account that make us make wrong decisions based off the data we have. And I think the more we can commingle kind of those external factors into the decision-making we're doing, the better off we'll be. Because if we don't have, I think we said it upstairs, if we can't measure it, more importantly, measure it properly, then there's nothing we could do with it at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a data perspective, in terms of the commingling, again, we think a lot about once the customer's in our ecosystem and getting a lot better understanding of who that customer is, and that requires all of the pipes to do so. And so I think that it's a little bit of the trade-off from an organization. We're all in the midst of growing pains of setting up ourselves appropriately to pipe the data back, right, as well as be able to utilize it and the lift that's involved.
And I think we always talk about commingling data for the impact it's going to have, but without doing it, it's hard to prove out the impact. And with marketing departments and CMOs being held so accountable to ROI now, I think that it's become really, really hard for a lot of mid-sized companies to get the investment approved, because we see it all the time. Any tech offering, right? Any additional internal or external tool they want to pay for, it's not just, hey, I have a marketing budget, I can use it for whatever I want. Everything is held to an ROI. And I think that that's been one of the hardest things as well, is being able to not just pay for these tools, but quickly showcase the ROI of them. Because intelligence, even day-to-day intelligence, is so impactful. But at the end of the day, it could take 6 months, a year, 2 years to fully see the impact it's going to have on a business. And a lot of boards who are just looking at the forecast for this year or this month, it makes it really, really hard to kind of get the approval and get the ball rolling to pay for these kind of commingled data sets and the tools to do it that cost millions and millions of dollars sometimes.
Okay, we've talked a lot about intelligence. What categories do you all think could benefit the most? Which industry verticals from better intelligence?
So I'm going to go from the side that which ones probably have the least intelligence as of right now, and that's CPG, right? CPG is really, really and any company really where you're not in control of the final point of sale, right? We were talking to a company yesterday that sells men's shirts, right? They're here somewhere. And what they were pretty much talking about is the impact and the kind of hardship of, they sell to Macy's and they sell to Kohl's, and how impactful it is from a negative side for them to be able to be as effective as a D2C e-com company or any company where they are so first-party data rich. And I think those are the companies that actually need identity and intelligence, and specifically from a third-party perspective, because they aren't first-party rich.
I mean, I'm going to be selfish, and it's my industry and category, and all of the things that keep me up at night. Particularly speaking, the moving industry is quite disparate across the country. It tends to be localized. There are few national players like we are, and so I think, again, it's about understanding the steps of the journey for the customer and what puts them in market along the way. There's a lot of hypotheses that we have, but not a lot of enterprise-scaled products that are able to tell us and track customers through conversion.
I should have said you guys as well.
Yeah, we're in market.
Now you're going to be mad at me.
Okay, it wouldn't be a proper panel in 2023 if we didn't talk about the buzzword of the year, AI. How does AI affect all of this from an intelligence standpoint?
I mean, I'm a little less bullish from a marketing and like communication creative perspective on generative AI, if I'm honest, just from my own personal perspective. But I feel like from the media space, and I think anyone that's in that role, we spend so much time trying to look at the data that we get from the models, whether it be regression, attribution, to understand what's happening. And it's a significant lift, certainly by y'all's team and our team at the company, to go through and understand what these large data sets are saying. I think that AI can really benefit the time saved for someone to go through and ingest large sets of data about consumer behavior or what's happening when we expose someone to media to help us make decisions. That's the end of the day, all we're looking to do is to take and understand the data available to us and make the best decision with that information.
So that was going to be my first answer. So I'll go to something that maybe isn't on everyone's mind, but
Good thing you're fast on your feet.
but I think it's going to be very, very impactful. I think at the end of the day, or one of the main things any company wants is for their people to be better, right? Be more efficient. And I think that everyone's goal over the next year specifically, while kind of the AI world is still figuring itself out and continue to figure itself out, is we hear it all the time, right? Clients, every brand wants their company and everyone in their company and everyone they work with to understand their business as well as they do, right? That's real partnership. I think that agencies and just any organization that is an extension of a brand has kind of gotten used to over the past 5 to 10 years of really being just not a doer, but a kind of an endpoint for a brand. And what we're starting to see more and more is brands don't just want an agency, they don't just want a vendor, right? They want a partner. They want you to be an extension of them because, I mean, we saw it in COVID. There was a huge kind of decrease in staffing for all marketing teams, and they need partners that know their business that can be an extension of them. And I think that something I'm really excited for from an AI perspective is the ability to train people, right? To understand their business, to understand and be even more specialized in what they're doing. I think that we've seen it across the advertising industry. A lot of people are self-taught, right? It's one of those industries where you could go to school for journalism. I think I actually met someone yesterday who's a CEO at a company that went to school from journalism and is now he's in advertising, right? And I think it goes to show that it's a self-taught tool a lot of the time, and I think the ability to help people self-teach when it comes to not just how to buy media, but how to look at business, how to understand business, how to take what you're doing from a marketing perspective and media perspective and apply it to each individual business is just going to kind of supercharge staffs on the brand side, on the agency side, on the vendor side to truly bring value to every single brand. And I think that's where the industry is going, is kind of redefining what is value looked at, or how do we see value from like a partnership perspective, and how does everyone continue to supply this ever-evolving kind of change in what value is.
Which categories do you think are going to be more impacted by AI next year?
So unlike the CPG answer, I would say the categories that are going to be the most impacted, I think, quickly are the ones with the most data. Right, your D2C, your e-com, where you are the start, middle, and end point, right, where you are continually able,
like pods,
to touch the customers. I think that any company that is expanding what they're doing from a CDP, ESP, SMS perspective, who already has a robust marketing and advertising effort for new customer acquisition, or if you're building out both together, that's going to be huge, because if you are the central point of data, you are going to be able to do amazing things with AI, especially as it comes to being able to commingle these data sets that initially were useless, right? And I think that's going to be something that really pushes the industry forward.
I think it's really important that it's actionable, right? Like the ability to ingest all of this data. We have a ton of information about the people who have done business with us in partnership with you guys, but being able to take it and put it into place in a way that actually drives to an outcome. And so I think, to your point, categories that have the ability to ingest those large sets of data, but from my perspective, it's really making sure that it's actionable versus like, hey, we can just see this 5 or 6 things in the customer's journey.
And I think like that's one of the things that I find so interesting is insights, right? Everyone wants insights, but if they aren't actionable and repeatable, I think that's become really, really hard as a marketer and as an advertiser, is what is actually important, and being able to pull out those things using intelligence, using all these big data sets that actually drives, again, value, right?
Yeah, we're jiggering our funnel right now, and I was telling the team that's working on it, like, it doesn't necessarily matter that we know 1, 2, or 3 as much as what is the activity that I'm going to do based on the information that I have. That's driving to an outcome.
Speaking of AI and intelligence and automation, we were told to stop this panel in 30 minutes. That's going to happen in about 10 seconds here. It was a great discussion about intelligence today. Alex, Calvin, thank you all. Intelligence is the future. Appreciate it, everybody.
Thank you, guys.